You know that moment when you're about to step out and you take one last look at yourself in the mirror. Not to check if you're comfortable, but to check if you look like someone who has it together. The clothes, the watch, the phone in your hand, maybe even the way you carry yourself. It's subtle, almost automatic. Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being just about how you feel and started becoming about how you're perceived. And if you're honest, there's a quiet pressure there, not to be wealthy, but to look like you might be. And that pressure, it costs more than most people realize. Most people don't consciously decide to chase appearances. It doesn't start with, I want to look rich. It starts with something much softer. You see people your age traveling more, eating out more, upgrading faster. And it creates this quiet question in the back of your mind. Am I behind? Not dramatically behind, just slightly out of sync. So you adjust. Maybe you upgrade your phone a little earlier than planned. You choose the nicer restaurant instead of the comfortable one. You justify small expenses because, individually, they don't seem like a big deal. And that's the part that makes this tricky. Because none of it feels reckless. It feels reasonable. Until you zoom out, and then you start to notice something. Your money isn't building anything. It's maintaining an image. The problem is, we've been trained to associate wealth with visibility, nice things, visible upgrades, external signals. But actual wealth, the kind that creates stability, is often invisible. It's the money that doesn't get spent. The decisions no one notices. The delayed gratification that doesn't get applause. And that disconnect creates a strange dynamic, because you can look financially ahead, while quietly falling behind. And the opposite is also true. Someone can look like they're doing less, while quietly building a level of security that most people never reach. But we don't see that part. We see the surface. And naturally we respond to what's visible. There's also a psychological layer to this that doesn't get talked about enough. Spending, especially visible spending, isn't just about the item itself. It's about what it represents. Control, progress, status, relief. Sometimes it's even about identity. You're not just buying a thing, you're buying a version of yourself. The version that doesn't feel behind. The version that feels included. The version that feels like they're moving forward. And in the moment, it works. That feeling is real. But it's also temporary. Because the underlying concern hasn't changed. If anything, it gets a little louder. Because now there's pressure to maintain that version. To keep up the appearance you just created. And that's where the cost starts compounding, in a way that isn't always obvious. Let's make this more concrete. Imagine two people earning roughly the same income. One prioritizes looking successful. Their lifestyle expands quickly. Better apartment, frequent upgrades, social spending that signals progress. The other moves slower. Their lifestyle grows but more selectively. They spend but with more intention, not out of fear of missing out, but out of clarity about what actually matters to them. From the outside, the first person looks ahead. More active, more visible, more on track. But behind the scenes, something very different is happening. The first person's money is constantly leaving. The second person's money is quietly staying. And over time, that difference becomes massive. Not because one person is smarter, but because one person is optimizing for perception, and the other is optimizing for position. There's a concept that explains this really well, even if we don't usually think about it this way. Every financial decision has two layers, the immediate experience and the long-term impact. Looking wealthy heavily prioritizes the first layer. How does this make me feel right now? How does this make me appear right now? How does this make me appear? And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. We all want to enjoy our lives. But when that becomes the default lens, something important gets ignored. The second layer. What is this costing me later? Not just in money, but in flexibility, because that's the real currency most people are actually chasing. Flexibility. The ability to say no to things you don't want. The ability to handle unexpected situations without stress. The ability to make decisions based on what matters, instead of what's urgent. And that kind of flexibility doesn't come from visible upgrades. It comes from financial margin. From having space between what you earn and what you spend. But here's the catch. Financial margin is invisible. No one compliments you on it. No one notices when you choose not to upgrade. So it requires a different kind of motivation. One that isn't driven by external validation. This is where most people get stuck. Because it feels like a trade-off between living well now and sacrificing everything for the future. And that's not actually the case. The real trade-off is much more subtle. It's between intentional living and reactive living. When you're trying to look wealthy, your decisions are often reactive. You respond to what others are doing. You respond to what others are doing. You respond to social pressure. You respond to the fear of being left behind. But when you're focused on becoming wealthy, your decisions start coming from a different place. Clarity. You begin asking different questions. Not, can I afford this? But what does this take away from? Not, will this impress people? But, will this improve my life in a meaningful way? And those questions, they slow you down, in a good way. They create space between impulse and action. And that space is where better decisions tend to happen. There's also something important to understand about time. Because money and time are more connected than they seem. When you consistently spend to maintain an image, you're not just using money. You're using future time. Future work. Future energy. Because that money has to be replaced. And if your lifestyle keeps expanding faster than your stability, you end up in a loop. Earning, spending, maintaining, repeating. It looks like progress from the outside. But internally, it often feels like pressure. A quiet kind of pressure that doesn't go away, even when your income increases. That's why some people earn more, but don't feel better. Because the system they're operating in hasn't changed, only the scale has, and scaling a system that prioritizes appearance over stability just amplifies the problem. The turning point usually doesn't come from a big financial mistake. It comes from a realization. A quiet one, where you start noticing that the things you thought would make you feel secure aren't doing that. You have the upgrades. You've kept up. But the underlying feeling hasn't shifted. And that's when a different question starts to form. What am I actually trying to achieve here? Not in terms of image, but in terms of experience. What does a good life actually feel like on a daily basis? And for most people, the answer isn't constant upgrading. It's something much simpler. Less stress, more control, more breathing room. The ability to handle life without everything feeling fragile. And once that becomes clear, the way you use money starts to change. You begin to see that wealth isn't about visible peaks. It's about quiet stability. It's not about having the most impressive moments. It's about having fewer stressful ones. And that shift, it doesn't require extreme discipline. It requires honesty. Being honest about what actually adds value to your life versus what just adds appearance. Because some spending does improve your life. Comfort matters. Experiences matter. But not all spending is equal. Some of it fades quickly, some of it creates ongoing pressure, and some of it quietly improves your day-to-day existence in a way that compounds over time. The goal isn't to eliminate spending, it's to align it. Practically, this starts small. Not with a complete lifestyle overhaul, but with awareness. You notice patterns. Where you tend to overspend. What triggers it? Is it stress? Social comparison? Boredom? And instead of judging it, you just observe it, because once you see it clearly, you gain some control over it. Then you start creating a bit of space. Maybe not upgrading immediately. Maybe waiting a few days before making a decision. Maybe asking yourself whether this is solving a real problem or just creating a temporary feeling. And over time, something interesting happens. Your baseline shifts. You stop needing constant external signals to feel like you're progressing, because you can see it internally, in your savings. In your reduced stress. In your ability to make decisions without hesitation. There's also a quiet confidence that starts to build. Not the kind that comes from being noticed, but the kind that comes from knowing you're stable. That your life isn't fragile. That you're not one unexpected expense away from stress. And that confidence, it doesn't need to be displayed. It shows up in how you think, how you decide, how you move through life. It's much less visible. But much more real. And the irony is, when you stop trying to look wealthy, you often end up moving closer to actual wealth. Not because you're doing anything extreme. But because you've removed a system that was quietly working against you. You're no longer leaking money into things that don't last. You're no longer making decisions to keep up with people who aren't living your life. You're building something that supports you, instead of something that needs to be supported. At the end of the day, this isn't about restriction. It's about direction, where your money is taking you. Because every decision is shaping that path, whether it feels significant or not. And the goal isn't to get everything right, it's to move slightly closer to alignment, a little more intentional, a little less reactive, a little more focused on what actually improves your life, not just how it looks from the outside. Because the real cost of trying to look wealthy isn't just financial, it's the stress, the pressure, the lack of flexibility that comes with it. And the real benefit of becoming wealthy isn't just the number in an account. It's the feeling of stability, of control, of knowing that your life isn't being held together by appearances, but by something much more solid. And that kind of progress, it doesn't need to be fast. It just needs to be real.